Far beyond Earth, in a peaceful region of the Milky Way galaxy, the Galactic Coalition had gathered for another routine cultural summit. This grand alliance, made up of over 60 intelligent species, had long been fascinated by Earth and its strange, unpredictable people, humans. Though Earth had not yet been granted full coalition membership due to what the Council called emotional volatility and an unusual relationship with danger, many scholars from across the stars found human culture too compelling to ignore. They watched Earth's history, language, and media with a growing curiosity. At this particular summit, the Vixari delegation, led by a gentle and thoughtful anthropologist named Grontil, presented something they had recently recovered from a lost Earth probe, a small plastic object labeled USB. With help from a human linguistics program, they translated the writing on it. "Do not watch alone, the scariest movies ever made." The warning made Grontil's fronds curl in delight. This, he thought, must be a valuable artifact of emotional expression. The Coalition Council granted permission to screen one of the files during the evening's cultural exchange. Grontil, along with a few curious delegates from the Seraphim, Tholkai, and Marnai species, gathered in the holographic theater. The file selected was a movie titled The Descent. The synopsis described a group of humans trapped in an underground cave system, stalked by unknown creatures. It seemed harmless enough. They dimmed the lights and began the projection. From the opening scenes, something felt different. The setting was tight, dark, and silent. The humans on screen were not at war, not solving science problems, not in space. They were simply adventuring until everything went wrong. As the characters descended deeper into the caves, the mood among the alien viewers shifted. Even those with no eyes could sense the tension. The walls were too narrow, the air too still, the sounds too sharp. Then came the first true scare. A sudden screeching movement in the background, and several aliens yelped. One Seraphim analyst emitted a high-frequency wail and bolted from the room, wings flapping wildly. The rest sat frozen, their brains struggling to understand why any species would create such an experience on purpose. As the film continued, the psychological pressure increased. Claustrophobic tunnels gave way to violent encounters. Pale, inhuman creatures lurked just out of reach. The characters screamed, cried, bled, and fell. But what unsettled the Coalition even more was not the monsters. It was the humans. They kept fighting. Even terrified, they made plans, faced danger, sacrificed for each other. The aliens had never seen fear used this way before, not as a reason to flee, but as a force to push forward. By the time the movie ended, the silence in the hall was absolute. Grontil slowly looked around the room and realized that two delegates were unconscious. One was breathing into a translator device that now served as a makeshift comfort tool. The Marnai ambassador was quietly muttering to themselves, unable to look away from the screen even after it had gone black. For the first time in Coalition history, an emergency emotional stabilization team had to be summoned, not because of a war, but because of a movie. Grontil himself felt deeply disturbed, not only by what he had seen, but by the realization that this was a form of entertainment for humans. This was what they enjoyed. He thought of the warning label on the USB, "Do not watch alone." They hadn't listened. And now, some among them whispered that the humans might be more dangerous, more emotionally complex than anyone had imagined. A simple cultural exchange had become something else entirely, a question no alien was ready to answer. What kind of species creates fear for fun, and perhaps more chilling? What else were humans capable of enjoying? The darkness in the grand auditorium of the Galactic Coalition deepened as the film continued, and with it came something none of the alien delegates had expected, a creeping sense of dread that tightened like invisible wires around their minds. The movie The Descent had started slowly, giving the illusion of a calm journey. but now it twisted and pulled them into a nightmare that none of their cultures had ever experienced before. Across the rows of floating chairs and gel-cushioned pods, alien observers shifted uncomfortably, their body temperatures rising, neural activity spiking. The claustrophobic scenes of the humans crawling through narrow, unlit tunnels made even the Varnikans, who thrived in lava tubes, feel suffocated. When the first creature appeared in the film, pale and sudden and shrieking, chaos rippled through the room. A telepath from the Orcs species let out a scream that echoed inside every delegate's mind before falling into unconsciousness. Another species, the Trivalians, known for having two hearts, fainted when both organs tried to beat in opposite directions at once. Grontil, despite all his years studying battlefields and post-conflict trauma, found himself gripping the edge of his seat, his face tendrils curling in horror. He could not look away, even as every instinct in his body told him to shut the projector down. The alien scientists were not prepared, not for the jumps that came from silence, not for the brutal panic of the cave scenes, and certainly not for the raw, desperate emotions of the human characters. There was no hero's victory, no easy ending. The fear did not lift, it wrapped tighter. One delegate's translator burst into static as the stress overwhelmed its circuits. In the quiet moments between the horror, someone whispered the question that no one wanted to say aloud. Why would humans watch this willingly? Another voice, trembling, answered, some of them watch it alone, in the dark, for fun. The room fell even more silent, disturbed not only by the film, but by the new truth they had learned about humanity. What kind of mind chooses fear when it can choose peace? Why do humans laugh after being terrified? The questions spun faster, then light through the collective minds of the coalition. By the end of the movie, half the audience had either fainted, fled, or gone into deep meditation to recover. One dignitary from the Marni species, overwhelmed by a scene of betrayal and desperation, released his secondary brain from its protective sac, an ancient biological response to extreme stress, before collapsing into a sleep state. A safari healer had to be called in to reabsorb the organ before it deteriorated. The coalition immediately called an emergency session, not for war or planetary threat, but for what was now being called cultural contamination. Some members argued for a full quarantine of Earth media. Others suggested banning all unsupervised, human content. But no one could deny what had happened. The psychological shock was real, the fear was real, and the humans, they were still watching more of these films without blinking. Grontil sat quietly in the medical chamber later, surrounded by beings on sedatives and energy wraps. He could still hear the film's final moments echoing in his mind. It wasn't just the monsters. It was the darkness inside the humans, the way they endured, the way they pressed forward when all light was gone. Was that bravery or something more disturbing? He didn't know, but he understood now that human fear was not weakness. It was something else, something powerful, deeply rooted, and entirely alien to the coalition. And it scared him more than any cave-dwelling creature ever could. The USB had looked harmless, a piece of plastic, but it had opened a door they couldn't close. What else was waiting on the other side? In the aftermath of the horror movie disaster, the Coalition Council remained shaken. The mental stability of several delegates was still under observation, and many species had banned Earth media entirely from their systems, at least until further research could be done. To prevent more psychological fallout, a decision was made. The coalition would summon a human expert to explain the mystery behind this strange cultural practice. They didn't need a warrior or a general, but someone who could understand the mind behind the madness. And so, through secure diplomatic channels, they contacted Dr. Evelyn Moore, a calm, sharp-minded cultural psychologist and a known historian of Earth's horror films. She arrived at the coalition station without any special armor, without Any robotic guards? But with a cup of coffee in one hand and a small tablet in the other. While the delegates waited anxiously in the briefing chamber, Dr. Moore walked in as if she were attending a quiet book club. Her eyes scanned the room, full of alien faces, some still trembling slightly, others hiding behind translators. She offered a polite smile and took a seat at the center of the circular table, completely at ease. The first question came from Grontil, who still felt the weight of what he had seen. "Why," he asked, "do humans create such terrifying stories? Why do they watch fear instead of avoiding it?" Dr. Moore took a thoughtful sip of her drink before answering. She explained that horror, for humans, was not just about scaring themselves. It was a way of facing their fears in a safe space. She called it a controlled dive into chaos, where the viewer knows it's all fiction, but their emotions get to run wild. According to her, it wasn't about pain or suffering, but about learning to manage fear, to survive emotionally, and even to bond with others through shared experience. In Earth cultures, she said, friends often watched horror films together, holding hands, hiding behind pillows, and laughing afterward. It was, in its own way, a celebration of courage. The aliens listened carefully, but many looked more confused than comforted. A Thulkai philosopher asked if it was normal for children to watch such things. Dr. Moore smiled gently and replied that not all horror was the same. Some was made for young minds with spooky but harmless themes, while others, like The Descent, were intended for mature audiences. To demonstrate, she played a short clip, only a trailer, of another film called Hereditary. As the unsettling music played, and images flickered across the screen, a Seraphin delegate fainted on the spot. Another, from the Marne species, begged for a neural cleansing unit to be brought in immediately. The room nearly broke into panic until Dr. Moore paused the video and reassured them that she had more peaceful examples if needed. Still, despite their reactions, there was a strange look growing in the eyes of some delegates, not just fear, but fascination. Horror, they realized, was not about enjoying pain, but exploring the limits of emotion. Grontil asked if it was a kind of training. Dr. Moore nodded. "Horror," she said, "could prepare the mind for real danger, helping humans learn how to think clearly when afraid." It wasn't only about monsters in caves. It was about real fears, loss, isolation, betrayal, and how to survive them. The aliens were silent for a while, processing this new understanding. Horror wasn't madness. It was a mirror. As the meeting ended, several delegates asked if Dr. Moore would be willing to guide them through more of Earth's emotional history. Some even requested softer horror films, curious to explore this strange human ritual at a slower pace. Grontil, though still wary, found himself strangely eager to understand more. Something about humans, about their way of dancing with fear, hinted at a deeper strength. And though many still trembled at the thought of another horror movie, the Coalition knew one thing for certain. They had only scratched the surface of what humanity was truly capable of feeling. After the unforgettable screening of The Descent, and the psychological shock that followed, the Galactic Coalition quickly realized that the event had left a deeper mark than anyone had expected. Delegates were having vivid nightmares, experiencing emotional instability, and some were refusing to return to dark places, even artificial ones. A new emergency directive was passed within days. No Earth horror content was to be viewed without trained trauma response teams nearby. All individuals who had attended the original screening were ordered into mandatory psychological therapy, regardless of species or rank. The Coalition's medical wing became the busiest department overnight, filled with alien beings sitting quietly under warm lighting, holding cups of nutrient-calming fluids, while soft, ambient music played in the background. The Vexari, always quick to adapt, took things even further. Their therapists began studying human calming rituals introduced by Dr. Evelyn Moore. Before long, Vexari healing chambers were filled with scented candles, soft blankets, warm beverages, and low humming sounds designed to mimic a human lullaby. Frequency. They even tried comfort food, replicating mashed potatoes and soup, though many found the concept of eating during emotional distress to be both strange and oddly effective. Despite the crisis, or perhaps because of it, an unexpected cultural shift began. Some alien scholars, especially the younger generation, started to view humans not with fear, but with quiet respect. These fragile-looking bipeds, with no claws, no natural armor, and short lifespans, had somehow found a way to look directly at their own darkness and laugh. They turned fear into entertainment, pain into stories, and nightmares into shared experiences. The idea that a species could explore their deepest fears for personal growth, or even fun, was unheard of in most coalition cultures. A quiet admiration began to grow, even among those who still avoided horror content. Meanwhile, in hidden corners of the coalition's data network, a strange new trend was rising: soft horror smuggling. Despite the ban on intense human horror, a black market formed around milder Earth stories. Titles like Goosebumps, The Twilight Zone, and even Coraline were traded on encrypted channels, with warnings like moderately spooky or emotionally unusual but non-lethal. For many aliens, watching these stories became a kind of dare, a personal test of courage. Some gathered in small, secure pods and watched episodes together, then immediately called their therapists to report how long they had lasted. It was dangerous, strange, and addictive, but survivable. Dr. Evelyn Moore, now officially appointed as Earth's cultural liaison for emotional studies, was invited to speak across various coalition academies. She explained how horror had evolved on Earth, from ancient ghost stories told around fires, to black and white suspense thrillers, to modern psychological horror that explored grief, identity, and the unknown. Her lectures were calm, clear, and always followed by soft blankets and optional group hugs. She emphasized again and again that horror was never just about fear. It was about survival, about the unknown, and about understanding what it means to be alive. Grontil, still recovering from the original movie, found himself re-watching clips, not the full movie but small moments. He studied the way humans screamed, how they regrouped, how they moved forward even after trauma. It was not madness, he realized, but something stronger, a controlled chaos, a kind of emotional training that no coalition academy had ever considered. And slowly, a theory formed in his mind. Perhaps this ability, to dance with fear and still find light, was not a flaw in humanity. Perhaps it was their strength. What had started as a cultural misunderstanding slowly turned into one of the most surprising moments in Galactic Coalition history. The horror movie incident, now formally labeled Event 137H, had first shaken the coalition to its core, leading to trauma units, therapy reforms, and temporary bans on all Earth emotional media. But as the days passed and the delegates began to reflect more calmly, something strange happened. Hidden beneath the fear and confusion, many members of the Coalition Council began to see the humans differently. What kind of species willingly faced their nightmares? What kind of minds could survive such intense emotional simulations and come out laughing, sharing popcorn, and asking for sequels? Slowly, what was once considered dangerous began to look like strength. Discussions reopened. Studies were written. Debates grew across academic circles. A shared conclusion finally emerged. Any species capable of creating and enjoying fear without breaking apart must be emotionally advanced, perhaps even more than the coalition had previously measured. And so, in a historic vote held beneath the twin moons of Yavaria Prime, Earth was granted provisional membership into the Galactic Coalition, not in spite of the horror incident, but because of it. Dr. Evelyn Moore, the calm and clever psychologist, who had guided the coalition through the emotional storm, was officially appointed as humanity's cultural ambassador. She accepted the role with quiet pride, wearing a navy blue blazer and carrying her ever-present coffee mug. During her appointment ceremony, held in the council hall before representatives of 62 species, she gave a short speech. She spoke, not of humanity's technology or power, but of storytelling, emotion, and survival. "We are not fearless," she said, "but we don't run from fear. We learn from it." Her words were translated into dozens of languages, some with song, others with color pulses or scent waves. Her message resonated in a way no one had expected. Following her appointment, the coalition requested that all future Earth media be reviewed for emotional appropriateness. They asked Dr. Moore to curate a list of safe educational content that could promote understanding without emotional damage. She nodded politely, assured them she would select carefully, and then walked over to the central media console. She tapped her tablet, uploaded a new file, and said with a small, knowing smile, "Let's try something a little less intense this time." The lights dimmed, the screen flickered to life. The opening scene of Jurassic Park began to play. Beautiful landscapes, ancient creatures, and peaceful music filled the room. The aliens relaxed slightly, some even settling into their seats with interest. But then came the first roar. A deep, thundering sound shook the chamber's audio system. A T-Rex stepped into view, teeth bared, eyes wild. One delegate dropped their drink. Another curled into their emergency calming wrap. Dr. Moore said nothing, simply watching with a calm expression, sipping her coffee as the scene continued. She had selected a classic, a story filled with wonder, science, and yes, just enough fear to keep things interesting. She knew that fear was not the enemy. It was the bridge. And these beings, so different from humans in shape and thought, were beginning to cross it. As the movie played on, one faint echoing sound could be heard from the back rows, a soft scream. Not from pain, not from panic, but the surprised cry of someone who had never met a dinosaur before. The lights from the screen danced across dozens of alien faces, some amazed, some afraid, all deeply, undeniably engaged. The transmission log for that day would later end with 3 simple lines. Media entry, Jurassic Park. Reaction, mixed. But non-lethal. Conclusion, humans may proceed with caution. And so, with one more scream and a room full of blinking alien eyes, humanity took its first true step into the stars, not through war or invention, but through stories that made even the bravest beings tremble and stay seated to see what would happen next.